today's topic of discussion is T cells versus B cells. T cells often are called T lymphocytes, whereas B cells often are called B lymphocytes. These are white blood cells and are responsible for the adaptive immune response in an organisms. Now today we will discuss the similarities and differences between T cells and B cells. So stay tuned. Now first of all, we will discuss the similarities between T cells and B cells. The first point, both T cells and B cells are involved in adaptive immunity. Now, what is adaptive immunity? Adaptive immunity is an immune system that is composed of specialized and systemic cells and processes that eliminate pathogens or prevent their growth. This adaptive immunity, also known as acquired immunity, it is one of the two main immune strategies that is found in vertebrates. The other being the innate immunity. The adaptive immunity includes both humoral immunity and cell-mediated immunity. Both T cells and B cells are a type of lymphocytes. These cells originated in the bone marrow. Both are nucleated and motile. Both T cells and B cells are involved in recognizing and clearance of pathogen and harmful substances in the human body, such as bacteria, virus, protozoa, and other toxic substances. Now let's discuss about some differences between T cells and B cells. First is the percentage of blood lymphocytes. About 10 to 20% of the blood lymphocytes are T cells, whereas 80 to 90% of the blood lymphocytes are B cells. Next is maturation. T cells mature in the thymus, whereas B cells mature in the bone marrow. Now, although both T cells and B cells originate from the bone marrow, but the T cells mature in the thymus, whereas B cells both originate and mature in the bone marrow. Number 3 is the position. T cells reside outside the lymph node, whereas B cells are inside the lymph node. Number 4 is often known as. T cells often known as T lymphocytes and B cells often known as B lymphocytes. As we have already discussed that both T cells and B cells are lymphocytes. These T cells are known as T lymphocytes, whereas B cells are known as B lymphocytes. Number 5 is the membrane receptor for the antigen. Now, what is the membrane receptor for antigen in case of T cells? In case of T cells, the membrane receptor for antigen is T cell receptor, that is the TCR. Whereas the membrane receptor for antigen in case of B cells are known as the BCR or the B cell receptor. Now, number 6 is the antigen binding. T cell recognize and bind antigen when bound to a cell protein such as MHC molecules. Whereas in case of B cells, they recognize and bind to peptide antigen without bound to a cell protein. Number 7 is the proliferation. Once the antigen bind, upon antigenic stimulation, it proliferate and differentiate into effector T cells. The effector T cells are helper T cells and cytotoxic T cells, and also in the memory T cells. So, this T cell differentiate into effector T cells and memory T cells, and the effector T cells are helper T cells and cytotoxic T cells. Whereas upon antigenic stimulation, these B cells proliferate and differentiate into plasma cells and memory B cells. Number 8 is immunity type. T cells provide cell-mediated immunity and also humoral immunity. Although they mainly provide the cell-mediated immunity, but T cells also provide the humoral immunity. Now, what is cell-mediated immunity? Cell-mediated immunity is an immune response that does not rely on the production of the antibodies. Rather, cell-mediated immunity is the activation of phagocytes, antigen-specific cytotoxic T lymphocyte, and the release of various cytokines in response to an antigen. Whereas the B cells involved in humoral immunity, and this humoral immunity is involved in the secretion of antibodies, complement proteins, and certain microbial peptides. This humoral immunity is named because it involves substances found in the humors or body fluid. It is also known as the antibody-mediated immunity. So B cells are mainly involved in humoral immunity, that is antibody-mediated immunity, whereas T cells mainly involved in cell-mediated immunity. But note that we have already mentioned that it also involved in humoral immunity. How these T cells involved in humoral immunity? Because it has only T helper cells, cytotoxic T cells, and memory T cells. So these T helper cells activate the B cells to secrete antibodies. As it activates the B cells and which involve in secretion of antibodies, so it's also involved in humoral immunity. Now, number 9 is the lifespan. T cells have longer lifespan, whereas B cells have shorter lifespan. Number 10 is the secretory product. T cells secrete cytokines, and the cytokines are IL-1, IL-4, IL-5, IL-10, IFN gamma, TNF alpha, that is tumor necrosis factor alpha, etc. B cells secrete antibodies. There are 5 classes of antibodies. These are IgM, IgD, IgG, IgA, and IgE. Now the subset. For T cells, the subsets are T helper cells, that is Th cells, cytotoxic T cells, and memory T cells. Whereas the subset for B cells are plasma cells and memory B cells. Now these are all about the differences and similarities between T cells and B cells. If you like this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Thank you.